Let's bring in NBC's Melanie Zanona on Capitol Hill. Ali Vitale is at the big board, and former Ohio Governor John Kasich, who served in the House where he chaired the Budget Committee, is an MSNBC political analyst. Okay, Melanie, the speaker said 2 Republicans missed the vote because they fell asleep, but they would have voted for the bill. But where do we go now? What's happening?
Yeah, the fact 2 members fell asleep and missed the vote, a sign of just how grueling this process has been. Congress pulled 2 all-nighters back-to-back to try to get this done in the early hours this morning. And you heard there Speaker Mike Johnson even admitting at a press conference after the bill passed that there were moments that he doubted whether he was going to be able to pull this off and had to turn to prayer. But in the end, it wasn't prayer that got this over the finish line. It was a push from Donald Trump, who had 2 meetings in the Capitol and as well at the White House with the House Freedom Caucus, and also GOP leadership released a revised version of the bill late last night with a number of key changes designed to win over holdouts. All of it providing plenty of fodder for a very vigorous debate on the House floor between Democrats and Republicans late last night. Take a listen.
The One Big Beautiful Bill is exactly what this country needs. It is bold, it is clear, it is packed with real solutions.
They don't want anybody looking inside this monstrosity. There's nothing beautiful or big about stripping 14 million Americans of their health care or removing food security from 11 million people, including 4 million kids. That's ugly. That's small.
This is one of the most important votes we will ever cast in this chamber. I am proud to stand here on behalf of this side of the aisle and say hell no to this bill.
And so now the bill heads over to the Senate, where Republicans are already warning today that they are planning to make potentially some pretty major changes to this bill, particularly when it comes to those Medicaid cuts. And all of that could really complicate the calculus for Speaker Mike Johnson, who is warning his Senate colleagues not to change the bill too much, given just how hard it was to put together a coalition and get this over the finish line. So, yes, a big victory for Republicans today, but we're still very early in this process with a lot more to go here.
Melanie, thank you so much for that. So, Ali, you've been going through the massive bill. Thank you in advance, because there were a lot of last-minute changes.
A lot of last-minute changes and a lot of pages even before we got to that 40-plus page manager's amendment. But look, you can't blame Speaker Johnson for trying, asking his Senate colleagues not to make too many changes, because he did a lot of haggling to get folks on board. And part of the reason he had so much negotiating to do was because of this debt limit increase number down here at the bottom of the screen. Now, there's a few different estimations on this. We're going with the Joint Committee on Taxation's estimate here that it's $3.8 trillion in actual debt increase packed into this bill. In large part, that's because of the extension of the 2017 Trump tax rates. That was always going to be a top priority, and here it is, top of the list as we track the tax changes here. But the other sticking point for Republicans among themselves was this SALT tax deduction. They've raised that cap now from $10,000 to $40,000, a way to placate some of the blue state Republicans in the conference. Also raising the child tax credit, no tax on tips. It's a notable campaign promise kept, at least for now, but that expires in 2028 the way it's written. Then we look at the health care pieces of this, and this is where Democrats have spent a lot of time shining light on what's in this bill, because Medicaid work requirements as well as increases in eligibility checks, both central as a pay-for mechanism in this, a way to take down federal spending. Barring Medicaid and CHIP funding for gender-affirming care. It says for minors, but in that manager's amendment, that language was actually taken out, so that's now applicable across the board. Just a sign of how small some of these changes might be, even though they have big implications from an impact perspective. Also, blocking money from nonprofit reproductive health providers. This is effectively Republicans defunding Planned Parenthood, and fun fact, actually costs them $300 million per the Congressional Budget Office to do so. That all in all leads to 8.6 million plus Americans who could be left without health insurance because of the implications in this bill. The same can frankly be said, Chris, for food assistance programs, because this bill cuts more than $260 billion to SNAP. It's one of the biggest overhauls in the way that this program is funded, by requiring states to share some of the costs. It's going to be pretty disruptive at the state-by-state level, but it also tightens work requirements for SNAP recipients. All in all, this means that more than 3 million Americans could lose food assistance programs like SNAP, like WIC, that they so heavily rely on. And then you get to some of the other policy priorities from the administration. Immigration and more money for enforcement was one of the top other priorities in addition to that tax piece. And that's why you see $110 billion in enforcement spending, the bulk of that going to the Department of Justice, DOJ, and HHS. But also another pay-for mechanism here could be imposing the fees on various immigrant actions. For example, talking about $1,000 for immigrants who want to file asylum claims. So that's another way that you're seeing Republicans try to generate some revenue within this bill. But jam-packed, and again, as much as the Speaker might wish that Senate Republicans aren't going to make that many changes, they certainly are, and this bill is going to look very different when it actually comes back to the House at some point this summer, Chris.
Thank you so much for taking us through that step by step. Governor, you were chair of the House Budget Committee. You know this process well. First of all, no question, right? It's a win for Trump and Johnson. They got largely what they wanted. I guess the question is, before we see what the Senate does to this, is this a win for the American people as well?
Chris, the problem is we're adding trillions of dollars to the already staggering high national debt. And I've been warning about this. I've talked to you about this countless times. At some point, as our debt continues to rise, people who finance our debt, foreign governments that finance our debt, are going to say, nope, we're not buying any more. And as the debt continues to rise, you can see what's happening to the bond markets. You can also see that Moody's downgraded the United States' credit rating.
We're looking right now at the House floor. I have sat through many of these votes as you guys have, watching those numbers tick along. We see one present, which I think we're going to learn who that was. But in the end, Democrats more or less held together. Nobody broke. We're going to take a listen.
On this vote, the yeas are 215, the nays are 214, with one answering present. The bill is passed.
USA. Oh, we can see House Speaker Mike Johnson there. And a lot of applause from Republicans in this moment. As Doug said, there was a fractured caucus on the way to this process.
Andy Harris from Maryland, a hardliner, was the present vote. That's one he's going to have to explain, not just to the president, but to his constituents.
So I want to talk about this as even just, I'll call it a victory for the House Speaker, because there was a time where it felt like no Republican speaker could survive even the most basic votes or process, and like he's managed to do that.
That's true, and this was a speaker that came pretty much from nowhere after the chaos, after the ouster of Speaker McCarthy, and I think he has confounded the expectations of many people in building and knitting this very fractious Republican coalition together. But I think your point is a good one. A lot of the things that he had to put in this bill to get it through the House by that one vote, they're going to be very problematic for certain Republican senators, some that are running for re-election. When it comes back, it's going to be really interesting to see what it actually looks like.
What kind of pressure does this put on the Senate now, right? Because there is going to be a lot of conversations as they kind of reconcile, right, their part of the legislation. What do you think folks are going to be pointing to, talking about?
Medicaid, for sure. We've already seen op-eds that have been written by Republican Senate leaders in their local newspapers, as well as in the New York Times.
Leaders.
Yes,
okay.
Because they recognize that this is going to shut down rural health care. It is going to eradicate the already fragile healthcare system in many of their districts, particularly because there is a larger percentage of Medicaid recipients who reside in red districts than any place else. So I think that for them, they're paying attention because they know that this is going to have an effect on midterms. But moreover, their states cannot afford to lose that level of coverage.
Doug, can you talk about that?
One constant in Washington is that regardless of party, the House and the Senate usually do not see eye to eye on things.
Correct.
And this is certainly going to play out over the coming weeks when they come back from the Memorial Day recess.
Right, you're looking at high fives on the House floor, people taking pictures with the House Speaker. The reason being the breaking news. House Republicans just pushed President Trump's domestic agenda a big step forward, passing the massive tax cuts and spending bill after marathon meetings and deep internal divisions that we've talked so much about among House Republicans themselves. The House Speaker, Mike Johnson, managing to keep united almost all House Republicans behind signed the sweeping spending bill after the Rules Committee meeting lasted almost 22 hours. 2 Republicans voted against the measure. There are big changes that were made in these marathon meetings overnight that made it capable to get the bill to this point, to the floor, and now headed over to the Senate. CNN's Lauren Fox is on Capitol Hill following all of this for us. Lauren, how did we get from there to here, and what now?
It's been a really remarkable 24 hours on Capitol Hill, especially for House Speaker Mike Johnson, who had set this incredibly ambitious deadline of getting this bill out of the House of Representatives by Memorial Day weekend. Now, so many of his members even were skeptical that this was going to be possible. Yesterday morning, you had members of the House Freedom Caucus saying that they needed another 7 to 10 days to negotiate in order to pass this bill, arguing that this deadline was really arbitrary, that the Speaker was trying to speed this up too quickly, and yet the Speaker was able to just get this finished. The Speaker is still on the floor, receiving high fives, hugs, people trying to get photographs with him as they are celebrating this victory. Republicans winning this vote 215 to 214. There were still 2 Republican holdouts, Thomas Massie and Warren Davidson, who voted against this bill because of concerns that it is adding too much to the country's deficit. But still, this is a huge victory where Speaker Johnson was able to bring some of the moderates together, some of those swing district New York Republicans together, and members of the House Freedom Caucus. And he did this in a couple of different ways. One, he gave the House Freedom Caucus what they wanted, which was expediting how quickly work requirements for Medicaid went into effect. He also moved up the deadline for how quickly some of the energy tax credits expired from the period where Joe Biden had passed his own reconciliation bill. And then, of course, for some of those New York moderates, there was an increase in how much people in their district.
We were right. The Trump bill as it was yesterday didn't pass. People are going to say, oh, it's a victory for Trump because he went to Capitol Hill. But this bill has dozens of changes, maybe hundreds when you count little commas and changes, and maybe they found typos, like major changes to the bill as well that Trump didn't want because he said, don't mess with my bill. My big, beautiful bill needs no changes. And they made changes, which is going to probably bother Trump at least a little bit. But here's the thing. The changes they made don't make the bill any less likely to piss off a majority of Americans. Because let's be clear, they don't solve the underlying concerns that either side has. They don't solve the underlying concern that decent, regular people have, which is they don't want to see their programs cut. They don't. Trump didn't run on program cuts. He didn't. He ran on lower prices. That's what he ran on. And he explicitly denounced Republicans like DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Pence, who ran on social program cuts. He said, I'm not like those other Republicans. Now, we knew, you and I knew he was lying, but he wasn't neutral on the issue. He wasn't silent on the issue. He ran in direct opposition to this bill. This bill is a rejection of Trump 2024 campaign. Now, it's still not good enough for the right, though, because they don't like how it affects the budget. And so, principled fiscal conservatives, insofar as they exist, understand that any savings from the tax cut, or from the program cuts, go instantly to trillions in new tax cuts. So no one's happy. The budget hawks aren't happy. Regular, decent people aren't happy. The only people that are happy, or at least okay, are the people that passed the bill, and that's only 200 and some people out of 350 million people.